Hello, everybody. Today we're going to make a video about God's nature. I think this topic is so important, and we're going to get into the message. We're not going to, hold you guys too long. We're going to talk about what is the nature of God and what is God's character. I read this article online, and I thought it was so important. I wanted to share it with you guys. I've been studying different things. I've been studying the art of nature. I've been studying the nature of God, and I've been studying human nature. We're going to talk about that another day. Today, we're just going to talk about God's nature and God's character. Okay, let's get into this message. What is the nature of God? The difference between the nature and character of God and what difference it makes. To know his nature without his character is to know a machine that is capable of anything but without a purpose or a design. To know his character without his nature is to know a person capable of thinking and acting with a purpose and a design, but unable to do anything. Okay, first we're going to talk about what is nature. Before we understand the nature of God, we have to understand what is nature itself. So this is what nature is. Nature is a essence, a substance, physical or mental. Nature is not praiseworthy. Things like beauty, whether a person is muscular or a person's color, those are praiseworthy, but it's not nature. Because nature, it can be appreciated, admired, but it cannot be praised. Let me say that again. It can be appreciated, and we're talking about nature. It can be appreciated. A person's color can be appreciated. A person's color can be admired, but it should not be praised. Think about this. There's so many people who are going around praising themselves for the color of their skin and the texture of their hair. And those things can be admired and those things can be appreciated, but it is not to be praised. It is not to be placed above others. Let's move on. And the reason why these things cannot be praised are because it is involuntary. Nature is not blameworthy. It is not wrong. It is not evil. It is not to be punished for its existence. Let me say that again. Nature is not blameworthy. It is not wrong, and it is not evil. It is not to be punished for its existence because it is involuntary. The person who made this message, I think they wanted to emphasize on how involuntary nature is. Nature is involuntary. Always remember that. There is no difference between a rock and a nose. Both are part of nature, but no credit goes to the rock or the nose for its existence, nor does any blame go to the rock or nose for its existence. And this message right here is so important. I'm going to substitute a word so you can get a better understanding. Let's say this. There is no difference between a black and a white person. Both are part of nature. Let me say that again. There is no difference between a black or a white person. Both are part of nature. But no credit goes to the black or white person for its existence. Nor does any blame go to the black or white person for its existence because they both are part of nature. Thank you. God's nature. Now we're going to talk about God's nature. I just gave you the definition of nature, gave you some examples of what nature may be and how nature is not blameworthy. You cannot blame anything on nature. You cannot blame nature for anything. And now we're going to talk about God's nature. God's nature. He's invisible. God is a spirit. He has a spiritual essence. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 16, it says, "And dwells in an unapproachable light, whom no man has seen or can see." In John chapter 1, verse 18, no man has seen God at any time. In John chapter 4, verse 24, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. This is God's nature we're talking about. God's nature is unchangeable, immutable. and cannot be different by nature. God's self-existent nature cannot be changed or change itself. And I said change with a ED and change itself. God's nature cannot be changed and it cannot change itself. In 1 James chapter 1, verse 17, every good thing bestowed and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or no shifting shadow, which means it cannot be changed and it cannot change itself. God has perfect memory. This is God's nature we're talking about. God has perfect memory. He remembers all things. In Hebrew chapter 6, verse 10, for God is not unjust so as to forget your work and the love which you have shown toward his name, in having ministered and still ministering to the saints. In Hebrew chapter 8, I will remember their sins no more, not take them into account. And that's what that means. And God has perfect imagination. He can conceive of all possibilities. Let me say that again. God has perfect imagination. You should have some sense of imagination also. I do. I love my imagination trait. But God has perfect imagination. He can conceive of all possibilities. That's how this earth was created. That's how this universe was created, from God's imagination. God is all-knowing and ignorant of nothing. Let me say that again. God is all-knowing and ignorant of nothing. Perfect knowledge of all that exists. This is because and a result of God being everywhere present. God is everywhere present, meaning he knows all things. All ideas and objects and events are known to him as they exist or happen. He knows all of your thoughts, intents, actions, words, all of them. He knows when each sparrow falls. He numbers each hair on your head. He knows all justice and injustice. He knows all suffering and evil. And God has infinite, which is my favorite word, which I say all the time, unlimited. God is infinite. He is unlimited. This is my favorite word about God. If anybody asks me about God's nature, I always mention it. I always be sure to include this in my videos. He is unlimited. God is an unlimited source, but he is infinite. He is perfect. Reason, intelligence, natural, divine reason. Come, let us reason together. All intelligent reasoning, concepts, precepts, possibilities, theories, logical thinking, etc. are his perfection. Let me say that again. All intelligent reasoning, concepts, precepts, possibilities, theories, logical thinking, etc. are his perfection. He perceives all possible options offered to wisdom. He is a perfect reasoner, a perfect idea thinker. He perceives all possible options offered to wisdom. He is a perfect reasoner, a perfect idea thinker. He has perfect perception of the greatest good, the best means to accomplish the greatest good in God's perfect plan. That is God's perfect plan. God's perfect plan is to accomplish the greatest good for everybody. All right, we're done talking about his nature. Now we're going to talk about what is character and what is God's character. But first we get into God. Before we get into God's character, I have to explain to you what character is. And character is the result of a choice. It is a moral quality. Character is either blameworthy or praiseworthy because character is voluntary. You remember how I told you before how nature is involuntary? Well, character is voluntary. You have the choice to act, think, and believe the way you do. Character is voluntary. Character is either virtue or vice. Love is virtue and selfishness is vice. Character is either obedience or disobedience to moral law. Character is relationship. I'm sorry about that. Character is how you choose to relate to other people. Let me say this again because this is so important. Character is either obedience or disobedience to moral law. And if you don't know what moral law is love everyone as you love yourself and as you love God. That is a moral law. It is not a religion. It is a moral law. Love everything. Love everyone as God has loved you. Character is relationship. Character is how you choose to relate to other people. These are all definitions of character. Now we're going to see the difference between character and nature. Nature is what a person is, and character is why a person does. So nature is what a person is, whether a person is black or white or Asian or Muslim, and character is why a person does. You get the difference? Nature is involuntary, meaning a person being black is involuntary. That is a nature. It is not praiseworthy. And character is why a person does. That can be praised. That can be defined as worthy or unworthy. Nature is what you are, and character is why you act. The moral law of God. And this is what I'm talking about. The moral law earlier about love one another. But let's just get into this. The moral law of God. It is the measure of characters. When they say love one another or love others as God love you, that is the measure of your character. Many of you don't know that. God is not caring about your color, your religion, the race you define yourself as, your gender. He's worried about your character and the measure of your character. The moral law cannot be set aside, meaning you cannot disregard loving another person because of your religion or because of your race or because of your beliefs. The moral law cannot be set aside. The moral law does not come from God's will, but from God's nature. The moral law does not come from God's will, but from God's nature. That is so amazing. It is an idea in the divine intelligence and science. It can only be destroyed or changed if the nature of God can be. But we've discussed that already. God's nature cannot be changed. So the character, the measurement of character can only be changed and destroyed if the nature of God can be. And that's impossible. That's impossible. And this is what it says. It can only be, the measure of characters can only be destroyed or changed if the nature of God can be destroyed or changed. It cannot. It cannot. And that's why it's so important, because you have to know the character of God, why God does what he does.